The Imperial battlecruiser Vigilant Axiom dropped out of warp above Terran orbit with all the subtlety of a thrown gauntlet, gold armor plating flashing like a second sun against the void. Inside the throne observation blister, Emperor Kharxian Vol stared through the crystal dome, fingers drumming the armrests of a chair worth the GDP of a frontier moon. 200 million credits already burned, 3 star legions mobilized, and every sensor array in the Armada hunted a single phantom. The Imperial battlecruiser Vigilant Axiom dropped out of warp above Terran orbit with all the subtlety of a thrown gauntlet, gold armor plating flashing like a second sun against the void. Inside the throne observation blister, Emperor Kharxian Vol stared through the crystal dome, fingers drumming the armrests of a chair worth the GDP of a frontier moon. 200 million credits already burned, 3 star legions mobilized, and every sensor array in the Armada hunted a single phantom. The human who had sabotaged the royal heir's coronation dreadnought slipped past nanoscopic sentries and left behind only a greasy wrench and a note written in perfect Gal standard. Your plasma manifolds were installed backwards. You're welcome. The insult, delivered as charity, had detonated across the hollow courts like a supernova. No one mocked the Crimson Dynasty and lived. Yet, 6 lunar cycles later, the only thing the Empire's finest had traced was the scent of high-temperature hydraulic fluid and the echo of off-key whistling caught on a security granule. Kharxian's golden iris implants zoomed down on the blue-white marble below, where a skeletal orbital elevator crawled with cargo pods and sweating maintenance crews. One of those pods, the Emperor mused, might contain his ghost. He spoke without turning. Open bounty to every mercenary guild, data witch, and gutter seer. 10 million credits alive. 20 million if he can explain how he breached my flagship with a toolkit from a 22nd century tractor. Behind him, Grand Marshal 6 cleared his throat, an avalanche trying to be polite. Sire, we've cross-matched every human engineer licensed outside the core. Negative. The biometric spore is strange, almost synthetic. Then widen the net, Kharxian hissed. Comb their colonies, comb their myths if you must. I want this mammal before the week dies. 6 bowed, cape of office crackling with static from the throne blister's climate field. He hesitated. There is one vector unsearched. The Emperor's drumming stopped. Speak. The palace itself, your own retinue. Kharxian laughed, a sound like star steel splitting. You suggest the saboteur oils my hyperdrives by day and signs his crimes by night. You suggest arrogance is a blindfold, sire. The laughter died. Kharxian rose, robes of living mercury swirling. Very well, begin inward scans, but do it quietly. If courtiers panic, I'll have your crest for a trophy. 6 saluted, already calculating which underlings he could afford to disappear. 4 decks below, in the sour-smelling guts of the Axiom, a human in a faded gray coverall whistled that same off-key tune as he coaxed a recalcitrant fusion compressor. His name tag read Jeb, Contract Tech Level 1. His knuckles were scraped, his boots acid-scarred, and his pay stub so meager it could hide behind a stamp. Jeb wiped his brow, leaving a carbon streak like war paint. He glanced at a chrono on the bulkhead. 17 minutes until the next security sweep. Plenty of time. He slid a magnetic spanner from his belt, twirled it once, and whispered to the engine. Easy, girl. Just a little bypass so you don't cook the Emperor's golden toenails next time he kicks the throttle. The compressor purred. Somewhere in the circuitry, a microscopic beacon, masquerading as a carbon flea, blinked twice, confirming data dump complete. Jeb grinned, tucked the wrench behind an access panel, and ambled toward the mess deck for a cup of the galaxy's worst coffee.
Above him, invisible macro cameras pivoted, hunting heat signatures and irregular gate patterns. They logged a low-caste mechanic, nothing more. The algorithms discarded him 3 nanoseconds later. But in the Emperor's private vault, a single line updated on a holoslate that no steward had noticed. Maintenance log, L4 reactor bay, tool ID 47 beta, logged out 060312, returned 061947. Technician, Jeb. A wrench that never officially existed. And in the black between stars, a battered freight shuttle ignited its engines, autopilot humming with coordinates buried deep in a song only one human remembered all the words to.
The freight shuttle coughed itself into the void like an old man clearing his throat after a century of sleep, its hull plates rippling with heat discoloration that told every customs scanner it had been places better left off the star charts. Inside the cramped cockpit, Jeb rode shotgun to his own autopilot, boots on the dash, sipping that contraband coffee through a cracked lid that dribbled down his chin in zero-G blobs. He watched the vigilant Axiom shrink to a golden spark in the rear display, then disappear behind Earth's Terminator line. Stage 1, he muttered, wiping brown specks off the console. Now we see if His Imperial Highness can take a joke. He thumbed a recessed switch under the dash. A subharmonic pulse, too low for standard comms, rippled outward, riding the shuttle's heat plume like a parasite. 30,000 kilometers away, a derelict weather satellite that had been decommissioned 2 decades earlier stirred to life. Its antique parabolic dish swiveled, locked onto the pulse, and fired back a handshake encoded in Morse, so old it predated human warp flight. Jeb grinned. Still got it, Grandpa. The satellite uploaded a compressed burst, star charts, Imperial patrol timetables, and a single line of text. Package delivered? Jeb typed back with a stylus duct-taped to a chopstick. Wrapped and bowed, now waiting for unwrapping. He allowed himself 5 seconds of satisfaction, then purged the exchange, wiped the shuttle's transponder, and swapped its ident beacon for one stolen from a Martian ore barge. The craft's true name, Second Breakfast, was painted on the inner airlock where no scanner could see it. He patted the bulkhead. Hold together, girl. One more burn and we ghost. Below, Earth spun like a turquoise gambling chip. Nightside glittered with city lights that hadn't been there when Jeb first shipped out as a teen. He tried not to look too long. Nostalgia cost focus, and focus was the only currency that kept breathing humans alive in the Emperor's economy. A proximity klaxon chirped. Jeb's eyes snapped to scope. An Imperial interceptor, sleek, shark gray, royal sigil blazing on its dorsal fin, rose from orbital shadow, thrust cones blowing like angry eyes. Traffic control, a crisp voice crackled. Unidentified shuttle, transmit charter code immediately. Jeb exhaled through his teeth. He had codes, good ones, but they were single-use bones. Chew them now and he'd have nothing left when the real hunt began. Instead, he opened a channel and let his voice go shaky, rural, harmless. Copy that. Imperial whatever you said. This is, Ore Maiden out of Phobos Yard. Got a busted nav comp. Drifting while I reboot. Give me 2 shakes? Silence. Then, hold position. Prepare for boarding audit. Jeb's finger hovered over a red trigger taped to the yoke. The shuttle's engines looked pathetic, but hidden between fuel cells sat a coil of alien tech that he'd won in a poker game from a lizard-eyed pirate, a one-shot gravity spike that could yank a pursuer sideways just long enough to slip away. Problem was, it also scrambled every circuit in his own hull, including life support. "Come on, big guy," he whispered. "Take the bait." The interceptor edged closer, spotlight bathing the shuttle in white fire. Jeb squinted, counted heartbeats, smelled ozone as the spike charged. Then static burst, different timbre. A second Imperial signature, massive, slid across the scope, the Axiom herself, dropping from warp like a sunrise. Her comms boomed on all bands. "Interceptor Dagger 3, return to formation. Priority target located on lunar far side. Acknowledge." The interceptor's pilot swore softly, cut the spotlight, and peeled away.
Jeb watched the shark ship vanish, released the trigger, and slumped until his chair squeaked. "Thanks, Emperor. You just saved me from myself." He waited until both warships dwindled, then punched throttle for the dark side of the moon. There, in a crater named after a long-dead astronomer, sat a refueling depot that didn't exist on any registry. 3 rested tanks and an android attendant who spoke only in haiku. Jeb needed hydrogen, coffee that wasn't recycled, and 30 minutes to swap the shuttle for a different ride, something with wings and a pedigree messy enough to cross 3 borders without questions. Halfway there, his wrist chrono vibrated. A single word scrolled across its cracked face. Compromised. Jeb's stomach iced over. The chrono was hard-linked to a dead man's subroutine inside the Axiom's reactor bay. If the beacon ever flashed, it meant Imperial techs had found his handiwork ahead of schedule. He swallowed. So the golden boy is smarter than he dresses. Fine. Plan B. Plan B involved a lunar cave, a freight crate labeled yeast cultures, and a human-sized cavity inside a shipment bound for Europa's underwater cities. Jeb would ride frozen, heartbeat slowed to a crawl, while cargo drones argued over tariffs. Crude, but the best invisibility was pretending to be freight. He angled the shuttle downward, dust blooming beneath the thrusters like pale ghosts. The crater rim rose, jagged and welcoming. Behind him, unnoticed, the derelict weather satellite completed one last pivot. Its ancient lens focused on the lunar surface, recorded a heat signature matching second breakfast, and, because old machines are loyal to whoever wakes them, beamed the image back towards Earth, where it bounced through a chain of hacked routers, finally arriving at a dingy apartment in New Detroit. There, on a cracked holoscreen, a woman with silver hair and pilot's eyes watched the blip settle toward the crater. She spoke to an empty room. "Initiate Plan C, sweetheart. Time to remind the Emperor that mechanics aren't the only humans who can take things apart."
The woman's voice triggered a relay buried in the apartment's sagging ceiling. A spark jumped across frayed wires, and 3 blocks away a derelict food truck coughed to life. Its paint, once carnival bright, now flaked like sunburned skin, but the fusion cell under the hood purred with outlaw upgrades. The truck rolled from its alley, autopilot locked on lunar slingshot vectors, cargo bay stuffed with enough shaped charges to crack a small moon, just in case negotiations went sideways. Back in the crater, Jeb set second breakfast down gentle as a secret. Dust plumes settled into glassy beads under the static landing lights. He cycled the airlock, stepped onto regolith, and felt the familiar ache of 1/6 gravity tug at his knees. Ahead, the android attendant, call sign Haiku, waited beside a fuel hose, optical sensors blinking amber. Haiku. Silent yeast crate sleeps, breathless man dreams of oceans, cold stars keep his time. Jeb tipped an imaginary hat. Poetic as ever. "Fill her up and prep the freezer, pal. I need to vanish before the Emperor finishes counting his gold teeth." Haiku bowed, servos humming like distant cicadas, and began coupling hoses. Jeb crossed to the stack of cargo pods, each stamped with forged Europa biotech seals. He found the one pre-drilled with micro-vents, popped the lid, and stared at the cryo-liner inside. Sleek, coffin narrow, temperature painted in friendly blue. A decal read, "Live cultures, fragile." He chuckled. The culture being preserved was 180 pounds of annoyed human. He climbed in, tested the padding, then paused. Something felt off, an itch behind the eyes that had kept him alive through a dozen border wars. He glanced at the crate's interior rim, a hairline seam where no seam belonged. Somebody had opened it recently, resealed it with military-grade nanotape. A gift or a trap? Jeb's hand slid to the side pocket of his coverall, closing around the greasy wrench that started everything. Imperial techs saw a tool. He saw a skeleton key, antenna, and dowsing rod all at once. He tapped the crate's floor. The wrench's magnetic head quivered, drawn to a metallic mass beneath the liner, something heavier than insulation. He peeled back foam. A slim disc the size of a poker chip glinted. Imperial tracker, fresh from the palace foundry, still warm with encrypted handshake pings. If he climbed inside now, the cryo-chill would slow his metabolism, but the chip would scream his location across the system before his first frost-bitten dream. Jeb exhaled. "Cute, Sykes. You're quicker than I budgeted." Footprints in the dust. Haikus were perfect circles. Overlaid were pointed boot tread. Royal issue. The Grand Marshal's covert team had beat him by maybe an hour. They left the bait, planned to snag him the moment he went under. Jeb pictured snipers nesting on the crater rim, scopes drinking infrared. He pocketed the tracker, then had a better idea. From the shuttle's toolkit, he fished a microtorch, popped the disk's casing, and swapped its crystal for a fractured shard off his own wrist chrono. Same frequency, different song. He set the hacked beacon on a 5-minute delay, dropped it into the crate, and sealed the lid. Let the Empire chase itself around Europa for a month. Haiku finished fueling, returned with a second poem. "Man walks twice tonight. Shadow self boards the coffin. Real self drinks the stars." Jeb grinned. "You always did spoil the ending." He lugged a spare oxygen tank, hefted it into the tracker-wired crate, and thumbed the lid latch so it looked secured. Then ducked behind a boulder, cracked the emergency valve on the tank, and sprinted low-gravity bounds towards the food truck now cresting the crater wall. Headlights off, electric engine whispering. Inside the truck's cab, the silver-haired woman waited, gloved hands on the wheel. She wore Europa Corp overalls, name stitched Mara Voss. Her eyes flicked to the rear-view mirror, clocking Jeb's silhouette. She asked, "Trouble?" as he swung aboard. "Standard Imperial housewarming gift," he said, slamming the door. "Left it in the crate for them. We've got 4 minutes before their own beacon lures them into a very cold, wild goose chase." Mara punched throttle. The truck bounced down the inner slope, suspension groaning. Behind them, Haiku stood sentinel, unfazed, reciting to the empty crater. "Goose flies north in frost. Hunters follow borrowed song. Ice rewrites the map." Jeb strapped in, wiped lunar dust from his eyes. "Plan C, huh? Thought you retired after Titan." "Retirement's a myth, like honest emperors," Mara replied, steering around a boulder. Tossed him a flask. "Drink, you'll need it. We're not going to Europa." Jeb swallowed bitter synth whiskey, felt it scald away vacuum chill. "Where then?" "Where the Emperor's gold can't shout," she said, and tapped nav screen coordinates hidden inside a dessert menu overlay. Destination, Ganymede's dark side, inside a derelict mass drive tunnel abandoned during the First Jovian War. There, a coalition of human dock rats, Belter refugees, and one disgraced Imperial cyberneticist were building something called the Ledger, and decentralized archive of every crime the dynasty committed, etched into quantum lass, ready to broadcast fleet-wide the moment proof reached critical mass. Jeb's sabotage footage, the wrench, the note, the reactor schematics, was the keystone. "So I'm not just a wrench-throwing monkey anymore," Jeb muttered. "I'm evidence with legs." "Evidence with a bounty," Mara corrected, "which means we move fast or we become currency." The truck hit the crater floor's upward ramp, launching into a trajectory that would intersect a forgotten supply maglev still humming beneath the regolith. Headlights off, they merged onto the ghost track, acceleration pressing them into seats. Earthrise filled the windshield, a swirling blue coin flipping through space. Behind, the tracker's 5-minute timer hit 0. Inside the crate, the hacked beacon woke, screamed its false location, and began drifting with the oxygen tank toward the crater center, an irresistible lure. On the rim, Imperial stealth teams tightened fingers on triggers, unaware they were about to ambush an empty box. Jeb stared at the growing jewel of Earth, thinking of every grease-streaked morning he had tuned the Emperor's flagship while nobles stepped over him like furniture. He twirled the greasy wrench between knuckles, smile crooked. "Let's go balance the books," he said, and the truck vanished into the lunar night, rails singing beneath them like distant artillery loading the next volley. The maglev howled through vacuum-straight tunnels carved by forgotten drills, headlights doused, only the faint violet glow of the rail's residual charge licking the windshield. Jeb felt the rhythm in his bones, tum-tum-tum, like the heartbeat of something huge waking up. Mara kept one hand on the wheel, the other on a slim detonator keyed to pressure sensors back at the crater. When the Imperial squad finally cracked the cryo crate and found nothing but an oxygen tank singing their own beacon's tune, she would gift them a lunar sunrise. Every gram of stolen fuel atomized, a blinding magnesium rose visible to half the near side. A signature no palace courtier could ignore, yet too fast to trace. A love letter written in light. We were here, we were never here. Minutes before detonation, the truck burst onto Ganymede's dark hemisphere through a camouflaged airlock disguised as ice. The mass driver tunnel yawned, 30 kilometers of abandoned rail aimed straight at Jupiter's swirling eye. Inside, work lights flickered like fireflies, illuminating a cathedral of scaffolds and quantum glass slabs already humming with data. Dock rats in patched vac suits floated between panels, etching photonic lattices with beam pens. Each pulse captured an Imperial transgression, massacres, currency manipulations, entire colonies sold to fund golden capes. The air smelled of ozone and rebellion. At the tunnel's far end, the disgraced cyberneticist Dr. Celine Kwan waited beside a makeshift broadcast array cobbled together from salvaged dreadnought antennae. She wore the Emperor's old sigil tattooed upside down on her cheek, a brand inverted. When Jeb stepped down from the truck, wrench slung through his belt like a king's sword, the workers paused. Silence rippled outward until only the rail's cooling ticks remained. These people had risked death smuggling components one bolt at a time. They needed a spark to believe the forge had caught. Jeb raised the greasy wrench overhead. Grease caught the work lights, scattering prismatic halos. "This," he called, voice echoing along the barrel, "is the key that unlocked the Emperor's bedroom door. Tonight we finish the job. Live, raw, uncensorable." He slapped the wrench against a quantum panel. Microfractures flared, embedding nanoscopic timestamps, proof the footage already looping across outlaw channels was untouched, unedited, undeniable. The crowd erupted, a low roar that vibrated the ice rafters. Somewhere a belter struck an anvil with a pipe. The clang rolled like thunder, and the tunnel answered with 100 improvised gongs. For the first time in centuries, the outer colonies heard harmony instead of decree. Mara linked the Imperial tracker's fractured crystal to Celine's console, feeding the dynasty's own carrier wave back through their military relays. When the Imperial flash bloomed, exact on schedule, every holoscreen from Phobos to the Kuiper lit with twin images. The Emperor's golden flagship orbiting Earth, and beneath it, Jeb's calm face stating, "Your plasma manifolds were installed backwards. You're welcome." Then the broadcast switched to vault after vault of evidence. Mass driver labor quotas, engineered famines, whole asteroids redirected into noble mining portfolios. The palace's secure channels scrambled to blackout, but the quantum glass shards seeded the data into entangled nodes. Cut one, 10 more mirrored. The Empire's propaganda engine choked on its own fuel. High above, aboard Vigilant Axiom, Emperor Kharxian watched his crest flicker, warp, dissolve into the mocking visage of the very mechanic he had stepped over in corridors. His roar shattered a crystal goblet, shards spun in microgravity like tiny moons. Grand Marshal 6 attempted emergency overrides, only to find bridge consoles looping a single line of archaic Morse. Told you so. The Imperial flagship,
pride of the Crimson Dynasty became a tin can rattling with laughter. On Ganymede, Jeb addressed the tunnel one last time. No speeches of conquest, no flag to plant. He simply raised the wrench, slammed it against an iron rail, and let the metallic peel speak. The crowd answered, a tide of clanging tools, spanner on pipe, welder on girder, until the entire mass driver sang like a bell forged from stolen dreams. Celine opened the broadcast beam full throttle. Every hammer blow translated to light, racing outward at Jupiter's magnetic whim, riding currents no emperor could tax. The sound reached orbit, where Mara's hidden probes amplified it across civilian bands. Children on Europa's ice cities paused snowball fights to listen, wondering why their parents wept. When the resonance finally faded, Jeb dropped the wrench into Celine's waiting hands. "Your turn," he said. "Keep it singing." She nodded, eyes bright as reactor cores, and fused the tool into the array's central node, its metallic memory now a permanent tuning fork for truth. Workers sealed the tunnel with reflective foil. From space, the structure looked like a discarded needle, harmless, forgotten. Yet inside, data rivers flowed, forever feeding mirrors in pirate havens, university darknets, even palace servants hungry for dignity. Days later, Imperial edicts offered fortunes for the saboteur's head, but descriptions conflicted. Some claimed he rode a rebel frigate, others swore he worked incognito inside the palace still, greasing the varied throne. Each rumor carried his scent, high-temp hydraulic fluid and off-key whistling, until mechanics across the empire began leaving wrenches in plain sight, silent pledges that the emperor's million credits could not buy. On every station, when brass demanded loyalty, someone would tap a magnetic spanner against bulkhead, producing that now legendary clang. Officers raged, but the sound was already gone, echoing through corridors, sleeping quarters, even the marble halls of the Crimson Dynasty. A heartbeat no amount of gold could muffle. And far beyond Jupiter's pull, a humble freight shuttle, renamed Second Breakfast by folks who never knew its story, drifted with engines cold, dashboard lights flickering through an old Terran melody. Inside, a recording played on loop, a calm voice stating that somewhere, someone ordinary had refused to stay invisible. Listeners would smile, some would cry, others would pick up their own tools, feeling weight settle into palms like purpose. Because the Emperor spent 200 million to find a ghost, unaware the ghost was never one man, but every hand he overlooked, every name he forgot, every heartbeat he taxed without noticing its rhythm. And now those hearts beat together, tum-tum-tum, down abandoned tunnels, across snowy moons, inside palace corridors, a galactic pulse rewriting the score. The wrench never left the array. The array never went dark. The story never ended. It simply waited, like all magnificent things, for the next grease-streaked dreamer to pick it up, whistle off key, and remind the cosmos that even emperors orbit something greater, the undeniable, unstoppable clang of ordinary people who decide, one turn at a time, to loosen the bolts on tyranny until the whole machine floats free, adrift another piece of scrap for the endless sky.